He had no way of knowing it wasn't a chance encounter, but a trap laid by fate itself. She didn't merely fall before his headlights. She carried with her a storm that left no road back. Power has a sound. It's the click of a pen when a contract is about to ruin someone, the hush of a boardroom waiting for your decision. I'd built my life on that sound. But that night, the storm drowned it out, and something else broke through. It wasn't the suitcase that caught my eye. It was the way she carried it, like it weighed more than she did, like she'd rather let it drag her into the asphalt than set it aside. Most people cling to their baggage out of desperation. She clung to hers out of defiance. The street was slick, nearly deserted, the city reduced to blurred neon reflections and puddles. I should have been home, buried in another file or another glass of scotch. Instead, I was behind the wheel, running from the empty victory of the boardroom. Lightning tore the sky open, and then there she was, stepping into my headlights like she had nothing left to lose. She didn't even look up. Just crossed, suitcase wobbling behind her, hair plastered to her face. By the time my brain caught up with my reflexes, my car clipped her hip. The sound of impact was small but final. She fell sideways, sprawling across the wet pavement, suitcase flung into the gutter. I killed the engine and was at her side in seconds. Rain soaked through my suit, but I barely noticed. She was conscious barely. Her lips moved. "He threw me out." The words were thin, broken. "The ring was just a trial." Her left hand lifted weakly. Bare. Just the faint impression where a ring had been. The suitcase lay open a few feet away, its contents bleeding into the street. A paperback swelling in the water. A blouse already ruined. Shoes mismatched, stuffed in without care. This wasn't packing, it was exile. I flagged down an ambulance with the kind of urgency money makes possible. Paramedics moved quickly when my name dropped between the thunderclaps. They rushed her into the vehicle, and I followed without asking permission. By the time we reached the hospital, I'd already decided she wasn't going into a crowded ward. Private room, private doctor, security on the door. That's the privilege of empire. Rules bend when you push hard enough. The doctors called her lucky. Concussion, bruises, nothing broken. But watching her under the fluorescent light, hair tangled across the pillow, skin pale against white sheets, she didn't look lucky. She looked unfinished, like her story had been interrupted mid-sentence. I should have left. Paid the bill, sent flowers, walked away. But instead, I stayed in the chair at her bedside, the storm washing the city clean outside. Time slowed. Hours later, her eyelids flickered. Green eyes, sharp and too awake for someone just pulled back from the edge. She saw me first. "You're safe," I told her. "Hospital. You'll be fine." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Who are you?" I considered telling her the truth as the world knew me. CEO, predator, strategist. But none of that mattered here. Not in this sterile room where our stories had collided. "The one who stayed," I said. She studied me like she was searching for the strings behind the words. Then, almost in disbelief, "Why?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the way she'd walked into the storm, like someone who had already lost everything. Or maybe it was the suitcase, still sitting by the bed like a silent witness. "What's your name?" I asked instead. She hesitated, lips parting, closing, then parting again. "Claire." Just Claire. No last name. No anchor. It sounded provisional, as if she could shed it the moment it stopped serving her. Nurses came and went. Claire drifted between silence and half-sleep, murmuring fragments too soft to make sense of. Once, I heard her whisper, "Don't let her find me." I didn't ask who her was. Not yet. The storm passed, but unease lingered. Something about her didn't fit the pattern of a woman discarded by a cruel fiancé. She carried a weight heavier than heartbreak. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into a story already in motion. At 4 in the morning, the door opened. A man walked in, tall, coat damp with rain, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. He introduced himself as Detective Monroe. "Routine follow-up," he said, flipping open a notebook. But the way his gaze flicked between me and Claire told me there was nothing routine about it. He questioned her gently at first. Where had she been going when she crossed Lexington? Who could he call for her? "Nowhere," she said finally, staring down at her blanket. "Just walking." But her voice trembled. And that pause, too long, too heavy, betrayed her. She wasn't just a girl cast aside. She was hiding something. And for reasons I didn't yet understand, I knew I wasn't going to walk away until I found out what. I built my empire by sniffing out lies in the air like smoke. And Claire, she was breathing fire she didn't want anyone to see. By morning, the hospital had the hum of an anthill, nurses weaving in and out, interns whispering, a parade of white coats. They looked at me as though I was her husband, her anchor. I let them. It was easier than explaining why a man like me sat through the night at a stranger's bedside. Claire woke with a start, eyes darting to the door before settling on me. "You shouldn't still be here," she said, voice low, as if someone else might be listening. "Maybe not," I admitted, "but here I am." She almost smiled, but it faltered when the door opened. A detective, sharp suit, rein still on his shoulders, introduced himself as Detective Monroe. "Routine follow-up," he claimed, though his questions were anything but routine. Where was she going? Who was she meeting? Why was she carrying only half-packed clothes? Her answers were fragile, stitched together, but Monroe wasn't buying it. His pen scratched furiously. Then the second visitor arrived. A woman in her 50s, all pearls and pressed silk, carrying herself like she owned the floor. "Claire," she said, too sweet, too sharp, "you've caused quite the mess." Claire froze. Her pulse monitor jumped. I caught her whisper. "Not her. Not now." The woman introduced herself as Eleanor Marchand. "A family friend," she added, eyes sliding over me with thinly veiled contempt. "But I know wolves when I see them, and she didn't come here to offer tea and sympathy." Monroe seemed to know her, though the twitch in his jaw suggested he didn't like it. "Eleanor, this is police business," he warned. "Police," she echoed, smiling as if the word amused her. Then to Claire, "Your fiancé has already moved on. It would be best if you disappeared quietly. For everyone's sake." Claire's hand gripped mine under the blanket, ice cold, trembling. Her eyes begged me not to let go. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't just hit a girl in the rain. I collided with a story tangled in secrets, money, and enemies powerful enough to send emissaries before dawn. The real question wasn't who is Claire anymore. It was what war have I just stepped into? Hospitals are supposed to feel safe. Sterile walls, constant beeping, an army of white coats assuring you that science is in control. But I know better. Safety is an illusion, one I've spent my career dismantling in boardrooms. And as I sat in that narrow hospital chair, watching Claire's pulse jump every time the door creaked open, I realized we weren't in a sanctuary. We were in a trap. Detective Monroe had left, his notebook too full for my liking. Eleanor Marchand lingered in the hallway like a shadow with expensive perfume, speaking in low tones to someone on the phone. Claire's grip on my wrist hadn't loosened since Eleanor walked in. "She'll take me back," she whispered, barely breathing the words. "Don't let her." I didn't answer, because I didn't know if I could keep that promise. At dawn, the hospital shifted gears. New staff, new faces. A tall orderly I hadn't seen before entered the room with a tray of medication. His badge was turned just enough to hide his name. I noticed details others miss. The stiffness in his walk, the way his eyes never actually looked at Claire. He handed me a clipboard. Routine dosage. She'll sleep for a while. Claire recoiled, pulling her hand from mine. I don't take that, she hissed. Not anymore. The orderly smiled too quickly, too thin. Doctor's orders. That was the moment I moved. In boardrooms, I win by reading hesitation. Here, I won by seizing it. I knocked the tray to the floor. Pills scattered across the tiles. The orderly muttered a curse, but not the kind of curse nurses use. No, his sounded like a man whose plan had just been botched. Security arrived after I made noise loud enough to wake the dead. The orderly tried to vanish in the chaos, but I caught his arm, twisting until his fake badge slipped free. Monroe, summoned back in haste, took one look at the man and swore under his breath. We've been watching him. Not hospital staff. Hired muscle. But whose? Eleanor Marchand was gone by then, of course. Her perfume lingered in the air like a calling card. Claire was shaking, her lips pressed tight. They don't want me healed, she whispered. They want me erased. I sat back down, forcing calm into my voice, though my blood was roaring. Then they'll have to go through me first. She turned her head, eyes wet, green and burning. You don't understand. They already tried. That's why I was out there in the rain. I wasn't running away from him. I was running for my life. The room stilled. The monitors beeped steadily, indifferent to the revelation. And I realized the accident wasn't the story at all. It was the prelude. Claire wasn't just a broken-hearted fiancée. She was a target. And somehow, I had just made myself her shield. Hospitals breed illusions of safety, guards at the desk, cameras in the halls, doctors on call. But illusions crack easily. I saw it the moment the second nurse walked in at dawn with a syringe that didn't match the chart. My men stopped him before the needle got anywhere near Claire's arm, but the message was clear. Keeping her here was gambling with her life. Detective Monroe argued about procedure, about protective custody. He insisted she'd be safer under police supervision. Maybe he believed it. I didn't. Whoever wanted her gone had already walked past hospital security with a fake badge. What made Monroe think his people would be any harder to fool? So I made the call. My call? The kind that doesn't get reversed. Within hours, Claire was in my car, the city sliding by in streaks of wet neon. My men followed in a second vehicle, keeping distance, eyes everywhere. I shouldn't leave the hospital, she whispered, watching the rain blur against the glass. It's not safe. It's less safe if you stay, I told her. They already tried once. They'll try again. At least with me, you'll see them coming. Her hand gripped the suitcase like a lifeline. I noticed again how heavy it looked for the few clothes it could hold. Something about it gnawed me, a puzzle with missing edges. I didn't take her to my penthouse. Too obvious, too many eyes on that tower. Instead, I drove us to a townhouse few people knew existed, a place I used when silence was worth more than gold. No staff. No cameras. Just locked doors and walls that didn't gossip. Inside, the quiet pressed close. Claire hovered in the entryway, as if afraid to cross the threshold. Why are you doing this? She asked finally, her voice raw. Because someone wants you erased, I said. And I don't take orders from shadows. We sat at the table, dinner untouched between us. The storm outside had slowed to a drizzle, but inside the air was heavy, thick with things unsaid. Finally, she set her fork down, eyes fixed on the suitcase at her feet. It's not just about him throwing me out, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. There are things I know, things I was never meant to see." She didn't explain further. Not yet. But the way her fingers tightened on the suitcase told me enough. Whatever was inside it was the reason someone had tried to kill her. And I intended to find out what it was. I didn't sleep that night. The townhouse was too quiet, the kind of quiet that magnifies every sound. The groan of the pipes, the faint tick of the clock, the occasional car hissing through wet streets outside. I sat in the armchair by the window, jacket off, tie loose, watching the glow of the city ripple across the rain-slick asphalt. Claire lay curled on the sofa, wrapped in one of my coats. Her suitcase sat at her feet like a loyal guard dog, its presence heavy enough to press on the room. She hadn't told me what was inside, not yet. But I knew. Instinct told me that whatever was locked in there was the reason she'd nearly been erased in a hospital bed. I told myself I wouldn't ask. People reveal secrets in their own time. In business, pressure too early makes men defensive. But every minute that passed, my curiosity grew sharper, more dangerous. Just past 3, I noticed headlights flash twice across the window. Too deliberate to be random traffic. My phone buzzed almost instantly. One of my men stationed down the block. Car's been circling twice. Black sedan. No plates. I glanced at Claire. She was still asleep, though restlessly. Her hand twitched against the coat, as if even in dreams she knew she wasn't safe. I motioned for silence and killed the lights in the townhouse. The room sank into shadow. Through the curtains, I watched the sedan idle for a beat, then pull to the curb. 2 men stepped out, dressed in black, shoulders too broad for anything but hired work. They didn't knock. They went straight for the lock. My men intercepted them before the doorframe splintered. A scuffle in the rain, fast and ugly, steel on flesh, boots sliding on wet pavement. One intruder fled. The other was pinned hard against the hood of his own car. When I stepped outside, the pinned man spat blood onto the concrete and looked at me with something between defiance and fear. "She doesn't belong to you," he said. "You don't know what you're protecting." I leaned close enough for him to see the truth in my eyes. "Then enlighten me." He only smiled through split lips, a smile too practiced to be anything but rehearsed. "Ask her. If you can handle the answer." Claire had woken by then, standing in the doorway, pale but steady. She hugged the suitcase to her chest as if that alone could keep her alive. And in that moment, I knew, sooner or later, she'd have to open it. But whether I wanted to see what was inside, that was another question entirely. The townhouse was silent again after the fight, though silence doesn't erase the memory of fists on flesh or the way headlights had painted death across my doorstep. My men had hauled the intruder away for questioning, though I knew he'd give us little. The kind of people who work for dynasties, like the Marchands, don't talk. They rot before they betray. Claire stood in the doorway, clutching the suitcase to her chest as though the thin leather could shield her from what was coming. Her face was pale, her eyes bright with that feverish determination I'd seen in survivors on trading floors, people who know the wolves are already circling but refuse to bow their head. "You saw them," she said quietly. "Now you believe me. I believed you the second someone slipped into the hospital with a syringe," I replied. "What I don't believe is why you're worth killing over. That's the part one need to understand." Her hands tightened on the suitcase. For a long moment, I thought she'd hold her silence again, keep her cards close. Then she exhaled slowly, like a woman stepping off a ledge. She set the suitcase on the table and unzipped it. She placed the suitcase on the table and unzipped it. Her fingers worked along the seam, peeling back a section of the lining I hadn't noticed before. From the narrow space beneath, she drew out a thin folder, a pair of flash drives sealed in plastic, and a disposable phone with its back cover pried open. She pulled out one folder and slid it toward me. pages filled with numbers, signatures, transfers that looked legitimate at first glance, but bled rot on closer inspection. I'd seen these kinds of documents before, in deals where offshore money bought governments piece by piece. "This is why," she whispered. "I wasn't supposed to see it. But I did. And I copied everything I could before they locked me out." I turned another page, my mind working faster than I wanted. Shell companies across Europe. Transfers routed through banks that shouldn't have touched this kind of money. The Marchands weren't just rich, they were laundering empires. "Billions," I muttered. She nodded once. "Enough to bury anyone who gets in their way. Enough to buy police, judges, whole cities." I looked up at her then, at the green fire in her eyes, at the bruises still fading on her temple. She wasn't just a fiancée thrown aside. She was a witness. Worse, she was a liability carrying evidence sharp enough to gut an empire. And somehow, she had dropped into my lane, into my car, into my life. I closed the folder carefully. "Claire," I said, my voice low, "if this is true, they won't stop coming. Not tonight. Not ever." She met my gaze without flinching. "I know." The suitcase sat between us on the table like a live bomb, ticking softly in the dark. The folder and flash drive sat between us like contraband pulled from another world. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the townhouse steeped in silence, so complete I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock. Claire kept her hands in her lap, eyes fixed on the table, as if even looking at the evidence again might summon the Marchands through the door. "How?" I asked quietly. "Did you get this?" Her lips parted, then closed again. A battle played out on her face. Finally, she drew in a breath and met my gaze. "He trusted me," she said. "Or maybe he just underestimated me." "I wasn't supposed to be in his study that night. He said he had a late call and didn't want to be disturbed. But the system was open. Spreadsheets, transfers, accounts. At first, I thought it was business. Complicated, shady maybe, but nothing worth risking everything. Then I saw the names. The companies that don't exist. The banks that don't take normal clients. And the amounts?" She shook her head. "It wasn't money being earned. It was money being laundered." Her voice dropped lower, like she was ashamed to say it aloud. Some of the transactions were labeled. Codes, initials. It took me time to piece it together. But when I did, I wished I hadn't. The Marchands weren't just moving funds offshore. They were cleaning money tied to trafficking, human lives bought and sold like cargo. Children, women, people who disappeared from one country and reappeared in another with no name, no record. Her voice broke, and she pressed her fingers to her lips, as though trying to keep the words from poisoning the air. I should have closed the screen and walked away. Pretended I never saw it. But I couldn't. I started sending copies to myself. Quietly. One email at a time, from an account he didn't know I had. And when the email stopped going through, I knew they'd caught me. So I switched to flash drives. One night, while he was drunk, I used his fingerprint to unlock the drive. I copied everything I could before the system locked me out. She laughed once, bitter and hollow. When he found out, he didn't scream. He didn't rage. He told me the engagement had been a trial period. That I'd failed. And then he threw me out with a suitcase and a warning. Not his warning. Eleanor's. Her hands trembled in her lap, but her eyes burned green fire. That's why they'll never stop. It's not about pride, or money, or even betrayal. It's about survival. If this ever sees daylight, their empire burns. And they'll kill me before they let that happen. I leaned back, the weight of her words settling like stone. The Marchands weren't just ruthless aristocrats with offshore accounts. They were monsters in silk and marble, hiding crimes too big to whisper. And now, sitting in my townhouse, was the one woman holding proof sharp enough to cut them open. The townhouse was wrapped in silence, heavy and waiting. Claire stood at the window, her outline blurred against the storm. I crossed the room slowly, drawn as much by instinct as by choice. When she turned, her eyes caught mine, and for a moment the danger, the evidence, the suitcase, all of it fell away. I reached for her hand, and she didn't pull back. The nearness was magnetic, unbearable. Her lips parted as if she might speak, but I closed the distance first. The kiss was soft, uncertain at the start, then deepened with a hunger neither of us could restrain. For a few stolen seconds, the world didn't exist, just the press of her mouth, the tremble in her fingers, the fire that sparked in my chest. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, breathing fast. "You should have walked away that night," she whispered. "Too late for that," I murmured. But then she pulled back, her expression shifting. The glow in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something darker. "Guilt. There's something I haven't told you," she said, her voice low, cracking. The words cut through the warmth like ice. I straightened, bracing myself. "At the beginning," she went on, "I thought I was helping him. Just little things, cleaning up spreadsheets, checking numbers, sending transfers. He said it was nothing important. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe he trusted me." She wrapped her arms around herself as if the memory chilled her. But it wasn't busy work. It was the money. The laundering. I wasn't just watching it happen. I was moving it. My logins, my approvals, my fingerprints. I helped them. And when I realized what it was too late. Her voice broke. I wasn't just a bystander. I was complicit. Not by choice, but it doesn't matter, does it? If the truth comes out, I look like one of them. And that's the piece you've been protecting. A woman who might be just as guilty. She looked up then, tears streaking her cheeks, her voice shaking. "So tell me, do you still trust me now?" I studied her face, the fear and shame written there. And though the evidence on the table was heavy enough to sink us both, I already knew my answer. The storm tapered off by morning, but inside the townhouse, the air had only grown heavier. Claire's confession still lingered like smoke after a fire, too thick to ignore, too bitter to breathe in. She sat curled at the far end of the sofa, staring into the shadows as though they might judge her. I hadn't said much since she told me that she had moved the money, that her name, her logins, her fingerprints were tangled in the Marchand's empire of blood. A part of me recoiled. I had spent my life building walls against betrayal, teaching myself that trust was currency too expensive to spend. And yet here she was, handing me a reason to walk away. But when I looked at her, I didn't see a criminal. I saw the woman who had walked into my headlights with nothing but a battered suitcase and the kind of defiance that doesn't come from guilt. It comes from survival. She hadn't chosen this. She had been used, twisted into a cog for a machine she never wanted to power. Doubt whispered, but my feelings for her roared louder. "We can't stay here," I said finally, breaking the silence. Her eyes flicked up to me, wide and searching. "Where would we go? They'll find me anywhere. Then we don't run. We fight." The knock at the door came then, sharp and deliberate. My hand went instinctively to the drawer where I kept a weapon, but it wasn't another Marchand enforcer. It was Detective Monroe. His suit was rumpled, his eyes tired, but his expression was a razor. "You've got something I want," he said without preamble, gaze flicking to Claire. "And I've got something you want too. A way out." He laid it out clean. He had been building a case against the Marchands for years. Their reach, their wealth, their brutality, it all slipped through his fingers because he never had the right piece. What Claire carried in that suitcase, and what she knew firsthand, was the missing link. Her voice could collapse the dynasty. In exchange for a confession, he said, you walk free. No charges. No prison. No headlines branding you an accomplice. You're not the enemy, miss, whatever your real last name is. You're a witness. Claire trembled. I could see the war in her eyes, shame, fear, hope. She glanced at me, as if waiting for me to pull away, to tell her she was too dangerous, too stained for me to keep. Instead, I crossed the room, took her hand, and held it firm. This ends with them, not you, I told her. Something in her eyes broke open then, relief, fragile but real. She nodded, once, resolute. The decision was made. We left the townhouse behind that morning, not as fugitives, not as prey, but as two people with a plan, walking side by side into the storm that would either destroy us or set us free. The fall of the Marchands didn't come in a single day. Empires don't collapse like glass. They erode like stone under relentless waves. But once Claire gave her testimony, once Monroe had the suitcase and the flash drives, the tide turned. The investigation spread like fire through dry grass. Hidden accounts were unearthed. Offshore banks began to leak. Politicians and partners, who had once bowed to the Marchands, scrambled to cut ties. Their marble mansions became fortresses under siege. Their faces, once whispered about with reverence, now filled the evening news with disgust. And through it all, Claire stood steady. She sat across from prosecutors, voice clear even when her hands shook under the table. She told them everything, the logins, the transfers, the nights she'd sat unknowingly at the heart of their crimes. She confessed her part, but Monroe kept his word. The immunity deal held. The world didn't see a criminal. They saw a woman who had survived, who had turned on her captors with the truth. When the final arrests were made, when the dynasty cracked and crumbled, I realized something startling. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel the thrill of victory that came with toppling rivals. I only felt lighter. The shadow that had haunted her since the night I nearly ran her down was gone. We left the courthouse together, stepping into sunlight that felt almost unreal after so many storms. She squeezed my hand, and for once, it wasn't trembling. We didn't stay in the city. We didn't need skyscrapers or headlines anymore. Instead, we went somewhere quieter, where names didn't matter, where no one cared about fortunes or families or fallen empires. On a stretch of beach one evening, waves curling soft against the sand, Claire turned to me. Do you ever regret it? Not walking away. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her. The wind tasted of salt and promise. Not once, I said. She smiled, unguarded, luminous. For the first time since I met her, she looked free. Our story hadn't begun gently. It had started in headlights and storms, in betrayal and danger. But it ended here, with danger behind us, with peace in front of us, and with love binding everything together. And that was enough.